Shields and swords, field of wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and placed, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
So can essays be literature? Now, obviously, essays get assigned to students to read, and so I guess it's a literature class, and I was assigned a literary essay, so essays must be able to be literature. But that leads to the question, what about your essay? Why is it that when you're writing an essay for a class, we have a kind of different expectation from it? And the truth is we shouldn't. I mean, you could produce an essay for a class that is great literature. But normally we don't think about them that way because we often use an essay for a different purpose. And so when we're looking at famous essayists like, say, Francis Bacon, we see them in a way that is only connected with education and not with the real history of writing. So in order to understand the importance of essays themselves, I think we really have to start with writing itself. So if you go way back in Neolithic Stone Age, we have surviving writing, but most of it there is just individual symbols. We don't see complex ideas. Now that isn't to say that they didn't think complex thoughts. They may have. It also isn't to say that they didn't necessarily write down complex thoughts. If they did, they didn't write them on anything that could survive. And so it'd be very improbable that even if there had been some great thinker in those days, that it would have survived to the modern era. Most of what we have is literally carved in stone. Well, you don't write really long things if you're carving it in stone. That's why you get a lot shorter things, individual symbols. By the time we get to the Bronze Age, you really start to get more complex ideas in writing. We get a lot of record keeping, laws, religious stories, account books, these kinds of things. And a lot of that is nonfiction, but what we would think about as an essay doesn't exist yet. Then we start to see a change when we get to the Iron Age. With the Iron Age, we see this new thing called the treatise. And a treatise is it's nonfiction. It's a long form, really systematic, treatment of a particular subject. So like Aristotle's Poetics, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, these kind of long nonfiction works. But the idea of these is that this is someone who's explored this thing deeply, and they're going to be expressing to you the ideas that they have developed by a deep exploration of whatever this idea is that they're dealing with. Whether it's Karl Marx and Das Kapital, thinking about the connection between economics and history, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, thinking about how to win war, Aristotle's Poetics, so forth and so on, right? A lot of what we would consider the great books of philosophy or Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, these kinds of things are what we call a treatise. But they're still not an essay. It's not until the 16th century that you really get the rise of the essay. And I think it's because by the time we get to the 16th century, we're on this side of the printing press, and we're starting to see more widespread literacy. And you get probably the first great essayist, Michel de Montaigne, and he coined the term essays. And in French, and it means something like a trial or attempt. And his essays were shorter. The essays of Francis Bacon and other great essayists are shorter than a treatise would be. And I think in this word essay, this word trial or attempt, we get more of the idea. You see, the idea of a treatise is I'm an expert in this thing, and so now I'm going to lay out for you in a very organized, systematic way how to think about this subject. In the case of an essay, it isn't that the person saying, I don't know anything about the subject, but rather it's an attempt. I'm trying out an idea. I'm trying out an idea in writing. And so for that reason, they tend to be shorter because they're just testing ideas by writing them and putting them out in the world and seeing what kind of response that they get, maybe even seeing what you think of in the process of writing it itself. Well, you have to think about why does the invention of the printing press and more widespread literacy bring the rise of the essay? Well, let's say that you are a person before the printing press and everything that you get has to be handwritten. Do you want someone's essay, someone's trial, someone's attempt at developing an idea? Probably not. That's a lot of work to do for that. Instead, what you're going to ask someone to copy for you is someone's treatise, someone's systematic laying out of an important idea. This is an expert, and he has laid out, or she has laid out the important idea that we have here. It's just not worth your while to pay to have someone copy someone else's essay. It is worth your while to pay someone to copy someone else's treatise. Well, by the time you get to the printing press and more people can read and write, then it becomes more valuable to have these little bits and pieces of things because suddenly you can read things. By the way, treatises are not the only things which are made possible by the printing press. Novels also. When you think about a novel, why don't we see novels before, say, Robinson Crusoe or that kind of thing? I mean, we have sometimes people will say like the Tale of Genji is like a kind of novel. I would not call it that. But even if you did, you don't have them widespread because the idea of sitting down with a really, really long text and reading it implies that that text is cheap enough that you're going to sit down and read that thing for pleasure. Obviously, if you have to pay someone to spend weeks and weeks or even months copying a long novel, it's unbelievably expensive, and you're not going to do that just for pleasure. You need to have a purpose for it. Whereas I have lots of novels I just read because I want to read them, right? But enough about novels. We see essays. Essays also arise in the same time, maybe a little earlier, actually. So why is it that essays then have become the way, the gold standard for how we judge education? So, I've assigned students to write things many times. I don't ask them to write a treatise. Even when I say a research paper, I really mean an essay, right? That's really what I mean. And I think to understand an essay is to understand this idea, the word of a trial or attempt. When we are teaching a student about something, we're assuming they are not an expert in it. They don't know a lot about it, and they have to test out their ideas. They have to try out their ideas. And so what they're going to do is to try to organize their ideas in a systematic way, lay out those ideas, and then present them to an expert to think of what they do with those ideas. And so when you think about the way that essay writing is taught, you suddenly see, oh my gosh, this is exactly what an essay is for. So one of the first things you do is, hey, what's your thesis? What's your main idea? What's your argument? In other words, what is the idea that you are essaying forth? The idea that you are trying, the idea that you are testing. If you're not testing an idea, you don't have an essay. And then you'll have maybe someone say, what about your structure? Your structure. Again, are you treating this idea in a systematic way? Or are you just bumbling around in the dark? Right? You need to have a systematic way. And then we look at things like evidence, right? Well, you are trying this idea. You're attempting this idea. If you're going to attempt or try this idea, you need to bring in some sort of reason or argumentation or something like that to convince your reader of this idea that you're just trying, or at least convince yourself that the idea you're thinking is right. And so when we read famous essayists like Michel de Montaigne or Francis Bacon or whomever, we are really looking at them themselves as a form of literature. But I think it's really useful for modern essay writers who are writing essays for school or for some other purpose to see that they're really part of a long intellectual tradition. And I think if you understand how essays work as literature, it'll help you write essays for your own classes a lot better.